Hello and welcome back to Mr. Fitness Geometry. Today we talk about writing equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. Most important thing about this entire lesson is knowing and understanding that everything we work with is all about the slopes of these lines. Okay? And to start, slopes of parallel lines, what do we know about them? Well, think about it. If I have this line parallel to this line, okay, what you should notice is that the rise over the runs will always have to be the same. Alright, so when we look at parallel lines, we know that their slopes will always be the same. Okay, so the lines that are parallel have the same slope, and any two vertical lines are always going to be parallel. So no matter what, any two vertical lines will be parallel. So in equations of lines, a lot of times we have equations in the form y equals mx plus b, where in this case your m is the slope of the line. Okay, and then if you have it in what we call standard form, right, there's two ways you can find the slope. One, you can solve the equation for y, or in my eyes the easiest way to find the slope of the line is when you go to solve, you end up adding or subtracting the x term and dividing by the b term. So one way you can find the slope of the line is to use the formula opposite of a over b. So if parallel lines have the same slope, in the following examples, determine if these lines are parallel if we were to graph them. Well, when I look at letter A, the slope of this line here, if I look at it, the slope is -5. And if I look at this line, the slope is -5. Remember, when it's in y equals mx plus b, the coefficient of the x term is always going to be the slope. So, do these lines have the same slope? Yes. Therefore, they are parallel. Okay? In the next one, there's two ways I can approach this. I have to find the slope of this line. Like I said a minute ago, if we're in standard form, I can use the formula, the opposite of a over b, where a is the coefficient of x, b is the coefficient of y, and c is the constant. So, in this example, a is 2, so the opposite of 2 is -2 over -6, and if I look at that, that would simplify to +1/3. Well, if I look at the other line, okay, I'm not solved for y, but if I wanted to solve for y, I could divide everything by 3, and I get y equals, I'll put a coefficient 1 with the x. And if I look at this line, the slope of the blue line would be 1/3 also. Alright, and remember, to determine if lines are parallel, all we need to know is, are the slopes the same? Yes, therefore these lines are parallel. And last, this is written a little backwards. I could rewrite this as 3x plus 4y equals 12 to put it in standard form, and then I could use the formula opposite of b over, or opposite of a over b, and if I look at that, the slope is -3/4. And here, if I use the opposite of a, which is -6 over b, which is 2, simplifies to -3. Well, if you compare the slopes of these two lines, are they the same? No. Therefore, these are not parallel. Okay. Now, writing equations of parallel lines. Everybody always makes this more difficult than it needs to be. Okay. But the only thing you need to know is to write an equation of a line, you need two things. Alright. First, you need the slope. Alright. And second, you need a point. Alright. Now, when we look at example 2 here, write an equation for the line parallel to y equals -4x plus 3 that passes through the point 1, -2. Now, to write this equation of the line, the first thing I need to find is the slope. Well, this line here tells me the slope. The slope of this line is -4. So the slope of my new equation is going to be -4. I am done with this equation. The only thing I needed from it was the slope. Because remember, the slope of this line is negative 4. Slope of line, any line parallel will also be negative 4. So I have the slope of my new line. I know a point it goes through. And remember, we write it in point slope form. We use y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. When we go and substitute in, y minus negative 2 equals my slope negative 4 times x minus 1. Uh-oh, what do I have to do here? I have to bling this. So y plus 2 equals, distribute the negative 4, negative 4x plus 4, and now I solve for y. And y equals negative 4x plus 2. If I were to graph my original line, this line here, negative 4x plus 3, and I was to graph this line, these lines would be parallel. The only thing that would be different are the y-intercepts. So the key to understand, I only need one thing from this equation. And once I take that slope from the equation, I'm done with it. So get the next one. Write an equation for a line that is parallel to 3x plus 4y equals 16 and passes through the point 8, 3. Well, first thing I need from this line, I need to be parallel to it, so I know I need a slope that's equal to it. So I use the opposite of a over b to figure that slope out. If a is 3, the opposite is negative 3, over b is 4. So if the slope of this line is negative 3/4, the slope of a line parallel will be negative 3/4. Now, I have to pass through the point 8, 3. I have my slope, I have a point, now I can write my equation. Y minus 3 equals negative 3/4 times x minus 8. So I go ahead and distribute. Y minus 3 equals negative 3/4 x. Then negative 3 times negative 8 is 24. Divided by 4 gives me positive 6. And when I go and add the 3, I get y equals negative 3/4 x plus 9. Okay? So, again, all I need from this equation is the slope. The other way to find the slope of that line, if I needed to, is to solve the equation for y. Subtract 3x. 4y equals negative 3x plus 16. And divide everything by 4. And y equals negative 3/4 x plus 4. What do I need from it? The slope. And if you look, I already used it. It's just another way to find the slope of that line. Now, perpendicular lines. If you look at perpendicular lines, what do we know about their slopes? Well, one thing is, if I have this line, this red line, and then I draw a line perpendicular to it, what you have to understand is this line has a positive slope, this line has a negative slope, this line has a positive slope. Anytime you look at slopes of perpendicular lines, they are always opposites of each other. One will be positive, one will be negative. Now, to determine if lines are perpendicular, if you multiply their slopes together, if the product ends up being negative 1, you know the lines are going to be perpendicular. Okay? Now, the other way to look at it is perpendicular lines will have slopes that are opposite reciprocals of each other. So, the slope of my first line is a over b, right? The slope of my second line would be negative b over a. It would be opposite reciprocals of each other. So, looking at example 4, if I look, the slope of this line, determine if they're perpendicular or not. The slope of this line is 5/2. The slope of this line is negative 2/5. Are these opposite reciprocals of each other? This is positive, this is negative, so they're opposites. 5/2, if I flip it, I get 2/5. Are they reciprocals of each other? Yes. Therefore, these are perpendicular. If I take this equation and I rewrite it, such as negative x plus 3y equals 8. If I look at the slope of this, the opposite of a is 1 over b is 3. My second one, I look, the opposite of a is negative 5 over b is 7. I get negative 5/7. They are opposites of each other, but they're clearly not reciprocals, so these are not perpendicular. And the last one, if I don't use the opposite of b over, I could say the slope of this is the opposite of a over b, which simplifies to 1/4. Okay, the other way to find it is to subtract 2x from both sides. Negative 8y equals negative 2x minus 24. And divide everything by negative 8. When I do that, I get 1/4 x minus 3. But I think that's a lot more work. I think it's a lot easier to just use the opposite of b, or a over b. Slope of this one would be the opposite of a, which is negative 4, over b is 1, so the slope of this is negative 4. So when we compare the two slopes, 1/4, and then negative 4, or negative 4 over 1. They are opposites of each other, and they are reciprocals of each other, therefore they are perpendicular. Okay? Now writing equations of perpendicular lines. No different than what we just did a minute ago. Okay? The only thing we need from the given line is the slope. So write an equation for a line perpendicular to y equals negative 3/5, or negative 3x minus 5, that passes through negative 3/7. Well, the slope of this line is negative 3. So, the slope of the line is negative 3. The slope of the line perpendicular would be the opposite reciprocal of that. Well, the opposite of negative is positive, and the reciprocal of 3 over 1 is 1 over 3. That would be the slope of my new line. I know it goes through the point negative 3/7, so now I use this information to write the equation of my new line. So, y minus the y coordinate, which is 7, equals 1/3 times x minus, what's my x coordinate? Negative 3. Bling bling that. And I get y minus 7 equals, distribute the 1/3, 1/3 x, and then 1/3 times 3. 1 times 3 is 3, divided by 3 is 1. Then I go ahead and I add the 7, and I get y equals 1/3 x plus 8. And we are done. Again, once I get the slope from this line, I am done with that. I don't need it anymore. The only thing I need it for is the slope. Okay, and looking at number 6, write an equation for a line perpendicular to 1/2 x plus 7 that passes through negative 2, 3. I would probably try this one on your own and then come back and unpause the video and check to see if you're correct. So the slope of this line, 1/2. Therefore the slope of a line perpendicular would be the opposite reciprocal. Opposite of positive is negative. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1, or 2. I know the point I pass through is negative 2, 3. Now I have enough information to write the equation of my line. Y minus the y coordinate is 3 equals negative 2 times x minus my x coordinate, negative 2. Bling bling. And then solve for y. Distribute the negative 2. Negative 2x minus 4. Add the 3. Y equals negative 2x minus 1. And we are done. So again, only reason you need this equation, only reason, is you need the slope from it. Once you have the slope, you are done with it. Alright. So, determine if the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. One thing I want you to understand, when you graph the equation of a line that's in the form x equals a number, right? That means all of your x coordinates are the same. And what happens is all those points line up vertically. So x equals a number is a vertical line. And if you have y equals a number, it will be a horizontal line. Remember, in order to have a slope, you have to be able to walk on it. So can you walk up a vertical wall? No. Therefore, a vertical line has an undefined slope. Horizontal line, you can walk on it. You're not uphill, you're not downhill. Neutral is a slope of 0. So, letter A. Determine if these lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Well, x equals a number. If x equals 2, that would be a vertical line. And then I have y equals -3. That would be a horizontal line. Well, if I take a vertical line and a horizontal line, what do I notice about them? They will be perpendicular all the time. So these are perpendicular. Okay, x equals 8. That would be a vertical line. And x equals 15. That would be a vertical line. What do we know about all vertical lines? They will be parallel to each other. Now, y equals -x plus 6. What is the slope of this line? -1. And y equals 4x plus 4. The slope is 4. Okay? Well, these are definitely not the same. And are they opposite reciprocals of each other? No. So this would be neither. Okay? And finally, the last problem. Our last two. Write an equation for a line is parallel to -x plus 2y equals 4. It passes through -2, 4. Well, slope of this would be the opposite of a, which is 1, over b, which is 2. The slope of that line is 1/2. The slope of my line parallel would also be 1/2. So in this case, slope is 1/2 through the point -2, 4. I can write the equation of my line. Y minus 4 equals 1/2 times x minus -2. Bling bling it. Go ahead and solve for y. 1/2 x plus 1. Oops. And y equals 1/2 x plus 5. Now I got the 5 by adding 4 to both sides. Again, try the last one on your own and then come back and pause it to make sure you understand it. Okay? Slope of this line. It's definitely not in standard form. But if I look, the coefficient of x is a, coefficient of y is b. So when I go to find the slope of this line, right, the opposite of a is -5 over b is 4. Okay, so the slope of my line perpendicular would be the opposite reciprocal. Opposite of negative is positive. And the reciprocal of 5/4 is 4/5. So the slope of my perpendicular line will be 4/5 through the point 0, 0. Y minus 0 equals 4/5 times x minus 0, which gives you basically y equals 4/5 x. And you are done. Hope you enjoyed the lesson. Have a good night.